Fractured masks. The snowstorm arrived with unexpected fury, transforming the mountain roads into treacherous white ribbons within hours. Eleanor and Julian had departed the Foundation Gala early, her brief appearance satisfying her father's requirements, while sparing her extended scrutiny from the tech world's elite. "We should turn back," Julian said, the SUV crawling at a dangerous crawl through thickening snow. The weather report underestimated this system. Eleanor glanced at her phone. "There's a Blackwood property 15 minutes ahead, a small lodge. We use for corporate retreats. We'd be safer there than attempting to return to the main estate." Julian nodded, his focus entirely on the nearly invisible road. The windshield wipers fought a losing battle against the snow as visibility dropped to mere feet. When they finally reached the lodge, a surprisingly modest timber structure nestled among towering pines, Eleanor felt relief wash over her. Julian parked as close to the entrance as possible, then turned to her. "Wait here. I'll check the security and get the generator running if needed." 20 minutes later, Eleanor sat before a crackling fire in the lodge's main room, wrapped in a blanket Julian had found. The power was out, but the backup generator hummed efficiently, providing enough electricity for essential systems. "Communications are down," Julian reported, setting a mug of hot tea beside her. "But we have heat, some light, and enough supplies to last several days if necessary." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "You seem remarkably prepared for someone who's only been with the family for 2 weeks. I reviewed all Blackwood properties and emergency protocols when I took the position." He settled into a chair across from her, the firelight casting shadows across his face. "It's my job to anticipate problems." "Is that what I am? A problem to be managed?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Julian studied her for a long moment. "No, Ms. Blackwood, you're not a problem." "Eleanor," she corrected suddenly, "if we're going to be snowbound together, you might as well use my name." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Eleanor, then." The storm howled outside, creating a strange pocket of isolation that seemed to suspend the normal rules of their existence. Perhaps that was why Eleanor found herself asking, "Why did you take this job, Julian? You don't seem like the typical security hire." He turned his gaze to the fire. "I needed a change. After 8 years in private security for high-risk zones, I wanted something," he searched for the word, "quieter. And you chose to work for the Blackwoods during our biggest scandal?" She laughed softly. "Poor career move." "I don't think so." His eyes met hers. "Your father hired me because I specialize in crisis situations, but I took the job because I believe in second chances." Eleanor felt something shift inside her chest. "You don't know what happened." "I know enough." Julian leaned forward, his expression earnest. "The neural interface was revolutionary. The privacy breach wasn't malicious. It was a coding oversight that nobody caught in testing." "An oversight that exposed people's private thoughts," Eleanor countered, the familiar shame washing over her. "The project was my responsibility." "And you've been carrying that weight alone," Julian observed quietly. Eleanor stared at him, startled by his perception. "My team wasn't responsible. I made the final call to launch." "Integrity is rare these days," he said, "especially in tech." The conversation flowed more easily after that. Julian spoke of growing up in a small Oregon coastal town, joining private security after college instead of the military like his father had wanted. Eleanor found herself sharing stories of her childhood. The pressure of being a Blackwood, her love of coding that had begun at age 12, her complicated relationship with her father. When Julian described losing a colleague during a protection detail in Eastern Europe, Eleanor saw beyond his professional facade to the man beneath, someone who had faced his own failures and carried his own regrets. "What do you miss most?" she asked later, as they shared a simple meal of canned soup and crackers. "About your life before the Blackwoods?" Julian considered the question. The clarity, he finally answered. In high-risk security, the objectives are clear. Protect the client, identify threats, neutralize dangers. Here, he hesitated. Here, the threats are less obvious, Eleanor suggested. Here, I'm not sure what I'm protecting you from, he admitted. External threats, yes, but sometimes I think the person you need protection from most is yourself. Eleanor felt exposed, as if he'd somehow accessed the self-destructive thoughts that had plagued her since the scandal. That's not in your job description. No, he agreed, his eyes never leaving hers. It's not. When Eleanor finally retired, to one of the lodge's bedrooms, she found herself unable to sleep. Julian's words echoed in her mind. For months, she'd isolated herself, punishing herself for a mistake that, while significant, hadn't been born of malice or negligence. She'd been innovative, pushing boundaries, and she'd failed spectacularly. But failure wasn't the end. It was a painful lesson, not a final judgment. In the morning, Eleanor found Julian in the kitchen, already preparing coffee. The storm had passed, leaving a pristine white landscape glittering under bright sunshine. "Roads should be clear in a few hours," he said, handing her a steaming mug. Eleanor accepted it with a small smile. "Thank you. Not just for the coffee." Julian's eyes softened with understanding. "Sometimes a storm forces us to stop running and take shelter. Maybe that's not such a bad thing." As they stood in the sunlit kitchen, Eleanor realized the protective masks they both wore had begun to crack, revealing glimpses of something neither had anticipated, a connection that transcended their prescribed roles of heiress and protector. Embers in darkness. The weeks following the snowstorm brought subtle but unmistakable changes. Eleanor emerged from her self-imposed isolation, beginning to re-engage with Blackwood Technologies remotely. Julian remained professional, but less distant, their conversations flowing more naturally during drives or security briefings. "You're different," observed Vivian Blackwood during her surprise visit to the mountain estate. Eleanor's stepmother, 20 years her father's junior and a former public relations executive, had arrived ostensibly to check on Eleanor's well-being, though they both knew Richard had sent her to assess Eleanor's readiness to return to public life. "Different how?" Eleanor asked, sipping her tea as they sat on the estate's covered terrace despite the February chill. Vivian's perfectly manicured nails tapped against her mug. Less haunted, almost content. Her calculating gaze shifted to where Julian stood at a discreet distance, monitoring the perimeter. "Your father mentioned you requested to keep Mr. Reeves on as your security detail when you return to San Francisco next month." Eleanor kept her expression neutral. "He's competent. He's also remarkably handsome for security personnel," Vivian noted with a knowing smile. "Richard usually hires retired military men who look like walking refrigerators." "Julian's qualifications are exceptional," Eleanor replied coolly. "His appearance is irrelevant." Vivian laughed softly. "Darling, nothing about a man who looks at you that way is irrelevant." Before Eleanor could respond, Julian approached. "Ms. Blackwood, there's a situation requiring your attention." In the privacy of her office, Julian revealed that the company's servers were experiencing a sophisticated cyber attack, specifically targeting the neural interface project files. "It's not public yet, but your father asked me to inform you. The security team believes it's industrial espionage, possibly from Meridian Systems." Eleanor felt her stomach drop. Meridian was their biggest competitor, and its CEO, Thomas Harrington, had been vocally critical of Blackwood's neural interface before the privacy scandal. "They're trying to steal our technology while we're vulnerable," she realized aloud. "The breach damaged our reputation, but not the fundamental innovation." Julian nodded. "Your father's called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow in Denver. He wants you there." "This is the first real test," Eleanor said, more to herself than Julian. to see if I can face the board after everything." "You can?" Julian said with quiet confidence. "And I'll be with you." The following evening found them at Denver's prestigious Altitude Hotel, where the Blackwood board had gathered in a secure conference room. Eleanor had presented a comprehensive security analysis, demonstrating how the neural interface could be protected against both the original privacy vulnerabilities and this new attack vector. "The core technology remains revolutionary," she concluded to the assembled board members. "With these additional safeguards, we can relaunch within 6 months." The skepticism that had greeted her entrance had largely transformed to cautious optimism by the meeting's end. Even her father had nodded approvingly, high praise from Richard Blackwood. As they departed through the hotel's opulent lobby, Eleanor felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Julian walked beside her, vigilant as always, but with a subtle pride in his expression that warmed her more than she cared to admit. "Eleanor Blackwood," called a familiar voice, stopping her cold. Thomas Harrington, Meridian's silver-haired CEO, approached with a predatory smile. "Emerging from hiding at last?" "Mr. Harrington," she acknowledged coolly. "Interesting timing, finding you here." "Pure coincidence. Denver's business community is small." His smile didn't reach his eyes. "I heard about your difficulties. Such a shame when ambition outpaces proper testing protocols." Julian stepped imperceptibly closer to Eleanor, his presence reassuring. "Speaking of protocols," Eleanor replied evenly, "I understand Meridian has been showing unusual interest in our secure servers lately." Harrington's smile faltered. "I'm sure I don't know what you mean." "I'm sure you don't," Eleanor agreed pleasantly. "Just as I'm sure the FBI Cybercrime Division won't find any connection when they complete their investigation." As Harrington's face darkened, Eleanor felt Julian tense beside her. His gaze had shifted to a man approaching from their left, a hotel employee, but something in his demeanor had triggered Julian's alert instincts. Everything happened in a blur. The employee lunged forward, a metallic object flashing in his hand. Julian moved with stunning speed, pushing Eleanor behind him while simultaneously deflecting the attacker's arm. There was a struggle, a sharp crack, as Julian forced the man's arm against a marble column, and the weapon, a tactical knife, clattered to the floor. Security converged within seconds, but by then Julian had the assailant subdued on the ground. In the chaos that followed, police statements, hotel management apologies, her father's controlled fury, Eleanor could focus only on the 6-inch tear in Julian's suit jacket and the thin line of blood visible on his forearm. Hours later, back at the estate, Eleanor insisted on treating the shallow wound herself, despite Julian's protests that it was nothing. "You could have been seriously hurt," she said, her fingers trembling slightly as she applied antiseptic to the cut. "That knife was meant for me." "Doing my job," Julian replied, though his voice lacked its usual professional detachment. Eleanor secured the bandage and then, unable to stop herself, kept her hand on his arm. "It's more than a job to you." Julian's gaze met hers, the professional barriers between them crumbling in the wake of the day's events. "Yes," he admitted quietly. "It is." "What is this, Julian?" she whispered, finally acknowledging the connection that had been building between them. "What are we doing?" Instead of answering with words, Julian gently raised his hand to her cheek. The touch was questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, he leaned forward and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. When they finally parted, Julian's eyes held both certainty and vulnerability. "Something I probably shouldn't be doing," he said softly. "Something I can't seem to stop." Eleanor smiled, feeling truly alive for the first time in months. "Then don't stop." The fortress of glass Eleanor Blackwood stared out the window of her family's mountain estate, watching snowflakes dance against the twilight sky. 3 months ago, she'd been the darling of Silicon Valley, brilliant, beautiful, and poised to take over Blackwood Technologies from her father. Now she was hiding in the Colorado wilderness. Her reputation in tatters after the catastrophic launch of Blackwood's neural interface system had resulted in a privacy breach affecting millions. The media called it the brain drain. Eleanor called it the end of life as she knew it. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Ms. Blackwood, your father asked me to introduce myself. I'm Julian Reeves, your new head of security." Eleanor turned, expecting another aging ex-military man like her father's usual hires. Instead, she found herself facing a man, perhaps in his early 30s, with sharp hazel eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. His dark hair was cut short, and he stood with the kind of quiet confidence that didn't need to announce itself. "I didn't realize I needed security in the middle of nowhere," she said coolly. "Your father disagrees. The public reaction to the breach has been volatile." Eleanor waved a dismissive hand. "The death threats are just keyboard warriors. Nobody's actually coming for me in the mountains." Julian didn't argue, but his expression suggested he'd heard similar dismissals before. "Nevertheless, I'll be overseeing your security and transportation needs during your stay." "So you're my glorified chauffeur?" The words came out sharper than she intended. "Among other things," he replied, unruffled. "I'll be nearby if you need anything." For the next 2 weeks, Julian was a shadow in Eleanor's peripheral vision, driving her to meetings with remote teams, standing quietly during her rare ventures into the nearby town, keeping a professional distance that suited her just fine. She barely acknowledged him beyond necessary instructions, until the night of the Foundation dinner. The Blackwood Foundation's annual gala was being held at a luxury resort 30 miles away. Eleanor had planned to skip it, but her father had insisted her presence was necessary to begin rehabilitating her image. "People need to see you're not hiding," Richard Blackwood had said during their tense video call. "That you stand behind our company despite the setback." "Setback?" Eleanor had laughed bitterly. "Is that what we're calling the largest tech privacy scandal of the decade?" But in the end, she'd agreed. Her father still controlled the board, and if she ever wanted to redeem herself professionally, she needed to start somewhere. Julian drove her to the resort in silence. She sat in the back of the luxury SUV, wrapped in a midnight blue gown that felt like armor, rehearsing bland responses to the inevitable questions about the breach. "You know," Julian said suddenly, breaking their usual silence, "sometimes the hardest part isn't facing strangers. It's facing yourself." Eleanor met his eyes in the rearview mirror. "I don't recall asking for philosophical advice from my driver." "Security specialist," he corrected mildly. "And you didn't. But I've seen that look before." "What look?" "The one that says you're preparing for battle." He pulled up to the resort entrance. "Just remember, you don't have to answer to everyone who questions you tonight." Before she could respond, he was out of the car, opening her door with professional courtesy. But as Eleanor stepped into the glittering snowfall, something had shifted. For the first time since arriving at the estate, she found herself curious about the man her father had hired to watch over her, the man who somehow saw beyond her carefully constructed walls. The fortress of glass that Eleanor had built around herself had just developed its first hairline crack. Tides of truth. "This is unacceptable, Eleanor." Richard Blackwood's voice filled the estate's study, each word precise and cutting. "Do you have any idea what this looks like?" Eleanor stood by the window, Julian beside her, close enough for support, but not touching. They had decided together to be transparent about their evolving relationship rather than hide it. That decision had prompted her father's unscheduled visit to the mountain estate. "I'm not particularly concerned with how it looks," Eleanor replied. "Well, you should be. The board is finally beginning to regain confidence in your judgment after the interface disaster, and now you're involved with your security detail. Man with no connections, no influence, no what, Dad? No money, no pedigree? Eleanor's voice remained calm, though Julian could see the tension in her shoulders. Julian has integrity, intelligence, and courage. What else matters? Richard's gaze shifted to Julian. I hired you to protect my daughter, Mr. Reeves, not to take advantage of her vulnerability. Julian met the older man's stare evenly. With respect, sir, I've never seen Eleanor as vulnerable. Challenged, yes. Healing, certainly. But never weak. A heavy silence filled the room before Richard spoke again. I've arranged for a replacement security team. They'll arrive tomorrow. That won't be necessary, Eleanor said. I'm returning to San Francisco next week. It's time I stopped hiding and faced the consequences of my decisions properly. This announcement surprised both men. Eleanor hadn't discussed this plan with Julian, though they had talked about her eventually resuming her role at Blackwood Technologies. If you're returning, Richard said carefully, does that mean you're ready to lead the neural interface redesign? The board wants to fast-track development with the new safeguards. Eleanor shook her head. I'm coming back, but not to continue the interface project. I want to focus on something different. The data restoration program for those affected by the breach. That's a PR function, not a position worthy of your capabilities. It's exactly worthy of my capabilities, Eleanor countered. I broke something, fundamental, people's trust, their privacy, their sense of safety. I need to help repair that before I create anything new. After her father left, promising further discussion in San Francisco, Julian found Eleanor in the observatory. Stars blanketed the night sky, familiar constellations mapping paths through darkness. When were you going to tell me about San Francisco? He asked, joining her by the telescope. Tonight, she admitted. I've been thinking about it for weeks, but I needed to be sure. Sure of what? That I was going back for the right reasons. Not because I'm running from something, but because I'm running towards something. She smiled slightly, echoing his words from the night of the blizzard. And I needed to know where you might fit in that future. Julian was quiet for a moment. Eleanor, there's something you should know about me. Something I haven't told you. The serious note in his voice made her turn to face him fully. What is it? Before I joined Special Forces, I was in tech security. Cybersecurity, specifically. He paused. I worked for Nexus Systems. Eleanor's eyes widened. Nexus was Blackwood's biggest competitor, the company that had most aggressively capitalized on Blackwood's neural interface failure. Your father didn't approach me randomly, Julian continued. He knew my background. He wanted someone who understood both physical and digital security threats after the breach. Did he ask you to report back to him? About me? Yes, and I did at first, but only about security concerns, nothing personal. Julian's expression was solemn. That stopped the night of the blizzard. I realized I couldn't be loyal to both you and your father's agenda. Eleanor processed this revelation, connecting dots she hadn't seen before. Is that why he was so quick to replace you? He knew you were no longer his informant. Julian nodded. Probably. I should have told you sooner. But you were protecting me, Eleanor finished, from feeling betrayed again. She touched his face gently. Thank you for telling me now. Where does this leave us? Eleanor considered the question, looking out at the vast mountain landscape that had been both her prison and her sanctuary these past months. I don't know exactly, she answered honestly, but I know I want you with me in San Francisco, not as my security, but as my partner. I'm going to rebuild more than just the damage from the breach, Julian. I want to rebuild Blackwood Technologies into something truly ethical, truly helpful, and I'd like you beside me while I do it. Julian covered her hand with his own. Your father won't make it easy. Few things worth doing are easy, Eleanor replied. But I've learned something important during my time here. The strongest connections aren't built on power or prestige. They're built on seeing each other clearly, even in the darkness. As moonlight spilled across the observatory floor, they sealed this understanding with a kiss that felt like both. An ending and a beginning, the final breaking of old barriers and the first promise of a shared future. Whispers of tomorrow, San Francisco greeted Eleanor's return with foggy indifference, the city neither celebrating nor condemning her presence. The Blackwood Technologies headquarters stood like a gleaming monolith in the financial district, its sleek exterior unchanged, while its internal structure underwent significant reorganization. Eleanor's new office was 3 floors below her previous one, a deliberate choice that raised executive eyebrows but sent a clear message to the rank and file. Employees, the hierarchy was flattening, and priorities were shifting. The Data Restoration Division had begun as Eleanor's pet project, dismissed by the board as an expensive goodwill gesture. 6 months later, it had evolved into Blackwood's fastest-growing department, with ethical AI specialists working alongside privacy advocates and mental health professionals to develop personalized recovery plans for those affected by the breach. The Passer Nielsen family's case review just came in, announced Prisha, Eleanor's deputy director, dropping a tablet on her desk. They're the 5,000th household to complete the restoration process. Eleanor scrolled through the report, satisfaction, warming her chest. 5,000 down, 5 million to go. At this rate, we'll be done in about 83 years, Prisha calculated with a grin. Then we'd better innovate faster, Eleanor replied, returning the smile. Across town, Julian stood in a converted warehouse space, watching technicians install advanced security systems. Blackwood Secure Solutions had been his idea, a subsidiary focused on protective technology for vulnerable populations. Domestic violence survivors, witnesses in high-profile cases, individuals with sensitive medical conditions, people who needed privacy safeguards that went beyond passwords and encryption. "Mr. Reeves, the quantum authentication protocols are ready for testing," called out Dominic, the lead developer Julian had poached from a defense contractor. "Want to try breaking them?" Julian nodded, moving toward the testing area. His phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor. "Dad's calling an emergency board meeting. Apparently my existence is still a corporate emergency." He typed back, "Want backup?" Her response came immediately. "Always. Dinner after?" "That Thai place?" Julian smiled, pocketing his phone. The past 6 months had been a careful balancing act, building their relationship while establishing professional boundaries, navigating Richard's disapproval while forging alliances with other board members, creating space for their individual passions while supporting each other's vision. The board meeting was contentious, as Eleanor had expected. Richard presented sales projections for a revamped neural interface, arguing that the market was ready to move past the previous failure. "Our competitors have already launched similar products," he emphasized. "We're losing our innovative edge, while focusing on damage control." Eleanor waited until he finished before responding. "The Data Restoration Division isn't damage control, Dad. It's the foundation of our new approach." She pulled up her own presentation, displaying statistics on consumer trust and ethical technology adoption. 5,000 families have completed our restoration process. Their feedback has been instrumental in developing what we're calling the Transparency Protocol. She outlined a revolutionary framework for technological consent and data ownership that would be embedded in all future Blackwood products. "This isn't just about making amends," she continued. "It's about creating a new standard that will differentiate Blackwood in the marketplace. People don't just want cutting-edge technology anymore. They want technology they can trust." Several board members nodded in agreement. Even Richard seemed thoughtful rather than dismissive. After the meeting, Eleanor found him staring out the window of his office, San Francisco spread below like a circuit board of possibilities. "You've changed," he said without turning around. "Not just your priorities, but your approach." Eleanor joined him at the window. "I had to." Because of the breach, partly, and partly because of Julian. She watched her father's profile carefully. He helped me see that leadership isn't about control. It's about responsibility. Richard was quiet for a long moment. He's not what I would have chosen for you. I know. But he's exactly what I needed. Eleanor smiled slightly. Just like Blackwood needed the wake-up call of the breach, even if it came at a terrible cost. Her father finally turned to face her. I may not fully understand your vision yet, Eleanor, or your choices, but I recognize determination when I see it. He hesitated, then added, Your mother would be proud of how you've handled this past year. It wasn't approval, exactly, but it was acknowledgement. And for now, that was enough. That evening, Eleanor and Julian sat at their favorite table in a small Thai restaurant in the Mission District, away from the corporate high-rises and tech campuses. To 5,000 families, Julian said, raising his glass. And to whatever comes next, Eleanor added, touching her glass to his. They had chosen a middle path between their worlds, not the isolated luxury of the Blackwood estate, nor the Spartan practicality of Julian's former life, but something uniquely theirs. Their apartment in Potrero Hill offered views of both the bay and the city, a fitting metaphor for their perspective that bridged different realities. I have something for you, Julian said, reaching into his pocket. He placed a small box on the table between them. Eleanor opened it to find not a ring, as she'd momentarily expected, but a key. What's this for? Remember that property in Sonoma we looked at last month? The one with the old observatory? Her eyes widened. You didn't. I did. He smiled at her expression. We close next week. I thought, on weekends, when we need to escape the city, we could have our own place to watch the stars. Eleanor curled her fingers around the key, emotion tightening her throat. It's perfect. Later, as they walked along the Embarcadero, city lights reflecting. On the dark water, Eleanor thought about the unlikely path that had brought them together. From a fortress of glass to a future built on transparency, from masks and defenses to vulnerability and trust. What are you thinking about? Julian asked, arm around her shoulders against the evening chill. About how sometimes you have to lose your way completely before you can find a better direction, she replied, and how the right person can help you navigate even the darkest nights. The breeze carried whispers of possibility across the bay, promises of challenges overcome and futures reimagined, of barriers crossed and new worlds created together. Not a fairy tale ending, but something more valuable. A continuing story of growth, purpose, and love built on the strongest foundation of all, seeing and being truly seen. In the soft glow of the city lights, Eleanor Blackwood and Julian Reeves walked forward together, no longer defined by their pasts or separated by their differences, but united in creating a tomorrow that honored the best of who they were and who they might still become.